All rise.
Good morning, Mr. Kennedy. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Chair.
Are we ready?
Yes, we are. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you.
Chair, we propose to call 3 witnesses today. The first is Mr. Pieter Knoetze. The second will be Mr. Mkwanazi. And the third will be...
1 second. I think the echo noise makes it difficult to hear you properly. They'll slow it down a bit. Okay, all right, continue.
Thank you. The second will be Mr. Mkwanazi and the third will be Mr. Mhlontlo. Chair, Mr. Knoetze is currently in George and has some difficulties in coming up to Johannesburg, which have been conveyed to you, Chair, by the legal team, and you have directed that he should be given leave to give evidence today by way of video link. So
yes, I've approved that, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. So Mr. Knoetze is available and is visible on the screens before you and before us.
That's fine. You might, just for the benefit of the public, spend a few minutes just to say what the evidence, how the evidence that will be led this week connects with maybe last week or the other week's evidence, or just give a summary so that they can follow much better as each witness gives evidence, or what transactions will be covered, and so on.
Thank you, Chair. If I may do that, we will be picking up the threads of the evidence that was led the week before last before you, Chair, for the whole week, and we will be dealing with particularly the issue of the contracts that were awarded to VR Laser by Denel and its various entities, the extent to which individual officials may or may not have been involved in that, whether or not there was compliance with procurement requirements and the like, and who took the leading role in each of those transactions. We will also deal this week, apart from the three contracts that are awarded to VR Laser for South African operations, we will deal also with an attempt to develop business in Asia, in which there was also a connection with VR Laser. And we will also deal briefly, Chair, with the award of a contract to the entity known as LMT, which ultimately became part of the Denel stable of operations when a majority shareholding in it was purchased by Denel. The evidence will relate to the business objective to try and bring in-house capacity. There were financial difficulties, the evidence will show, in relation to LMT, and they were then given a financial assistance, which was dealt with as if it were an advance payment on a contract. We will have evidence dealing with possible irregularities in relation to that funding. So that will be essentially the main focus of the evidence this week. In addition, we will take further the issue of how 3 senior executives at the board level of Denel were firstly suspended and later left the service, or were dealt with in a manner which involved the termination of their employment one way or the other. Mr. Salucci is scheduled to give a bit of evidence later this week. He gave evidence on the previous occasion. That's the former Group Chief Executive, and he was suspended and ultimately resigned in terms of a settlement after a lengthy process was attempted to discipline him. You will also hear the evidence of Mr. Mhlontlo, inter alia dealing with the circumstances in which he came to be suspended by the board. What we've also arranged, Chair, is for the chairperson of the board of Denel, Mr. Mancha, to give evidence at the end of this week to deal with a number of allegations that have been made in relation to how he handled his role as chairperson, and particularly in relation to the way in which executives were suspended, and also in relation to specific contracts that were awarded to VR Laser.
Okay, no, that's fine.
Thank you, Chair.
I read, I think, Mr. Mhlontlo's affidavit last night. I think it was him, yeah. And I noted that when it came to the offer that Denel made to him, which he ultimately accepted, which he said was substantially better than, I think, another one that may have been made before. I don't know if it was 3 months that had been made before. One, I didn't see any settlement agreement that may have been signed being attached to his affidavit. Two, he did not disclose how much the offer was that made him agree to leave. If we don't have the settlement agreement, I would like to have it. But I would also like to have the settlement agreements signed with Mr. Saluji, because I don't remember that when Mr. Saluji gave his evidence, he also covered that. But also, I think he too might not have disclosed to the Commission how much he was given. I haven't seen, is it Miss Africa or Mr. Africa? The other executive who was suspended together with Mr. Saluji and Mr. Mhlontlo. Is it Miss or Mr. Africa? Do you know? Yeah, I seem to think it was Miss, but I may be mistaken. I don't know if we have an affidavit from him or her, because if he or she also left under similar circumstances, I would like to see what settlement agreement was signed with them, with him or her, and how much was offered. Yeah, and I've no doubt that the current chairperson of the board who testified here can facilitate that quickly, as well as whoever the CEO is, because they should have records of. Now that's important, because it may well be that how things were done in relation to these executives have got similar features with how executives at ESCOM were dealt with, those who were suspended and then offered money to go. Now, in regard to ESCOM, the board members who have testified have struggled to explain or justify why ESCOM offered them money to go. Of course, the context there at ESCOM is that the board members who have testified say that they didn't have any problems with those executives and actually wanted them back, or would have been happy for them to be back, at least some of the board members. So there's the question of, why did you offer them money? If they wanted to leave, why didn't you let them leave? Like everybody resigns from a company. So there is that part. Now here at Denel, it would seem that over a long period, the board had the opportunity to come with evidence of misconduct or charges and substantiate charges against these executives. And then instead of subjecting them to a disciplinary hearing and let the outcome thereof determine whether they would continue at Denel or not, it seems that they then subjected them to long suspensions and at a certain stage offered them money. So I would like to know how much were they offered, because I will want to know what the justification for that is, why they didn't allow the disciplinary process to take its course. But one would like to know, to have the settlement agreements and to have the amounts that were offered as well.
Thank you, Chair. We will attend to that.
Okay, all right.
Thank you, Chair. Unless there's anything else, may we then, with your leave, call by way of the virtual hearing, Mr. Pieter Knoetze. May I ask that he be sworn in?
Yes, thank you. Please administer the oath or affirmation.
Please state your full names for the record.
It looks like he can't hear you. Mr. Knoetze, can you hear us?
It's through Chair. I can hear you. There is a little bit of small interruptions, but otherwise I can hear you, yes. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, all right. You can continue.
Please state your full names for the record.
Pieter Karel Johannes Knoetze.
Do you have any objections to taking the prescribed oath?
Not at all, no.
Do you consider the oath to be binding on your conscience?
Yes,
Do you swear that the evidence will give it be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing else but the truth? If so, please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
so help me God.
Thank you very much. Yes, you may start.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Mr. Knoetze.
Chair.
Is it correct that you have assisted the Commission with its investigators and its legal team, and that affidavits have been produced by you following that intervention?
Yes, it's correct, Chair.
Now, I understand you're sitting in George, I believe, is that right?
No, I'm at my house in Pretoria.
Oh, is it in Pretoria? I beg your pardon. Mr. Knoetze, is it correct that you have a copy of your main affidavit?
Yes, I have it electronically and a hard copy next to me.
Right, thank you. If you could please, as you were directed by one of our colleagues at the Commission earlier, if we could refer to page numbers on the top left-hand side, you will see there's a Denel-08-04. Do you have that?
Yes, I'm just going through it quickly, Chair. Yes, Chair, I'm at 04.
And this appears to be an affidavit bearing your name. Is that right?
It's correct.
And it runs in its text to page 32 and is followed by a number of annexes. On page 32, is that your signature?
I'm just going through to make sure, Chair.
The first signature on the page, because there are 2 or 3 signatures.
Yeah. I'll direct him if I may, Chair. Do you have page 32, Mr. Knoetze?
close to. I'm just going to make sure to confirm. Yes, Chair. It is my handwriting and my signature and the affidavit with it. Yes, Chair.
Is that the signature at the top?
Yes, Chair.
And below it appears that you signed in front of a Commissioner of Oaths and you took the oath.
Correct, Chair.
Right. Have you been through this affidavit and are you able to confirm that the contents are true and correct?
I have gone through it and I can confirm it is correct and true.
Chair, there is a supplementary affidavit. May I just ask formally for this affidavit first to be admitted? Chair, it forms part of Denel Bundle 08 and Exhibit W21, and we would ask your leave to have it admitted as an exhibit before this commission.
Okay. Did you say W21?
Yes, Chair.
The affidavit of Mr. Pieter Knoetze, starting at page 4 of Denel Bundle 08, is admitted as Exhibit W21.
Thank you, Chair. Now, Mr. Knoetze, it appeared during the consultations between members of the legal team and yourself that certain annexures were missing from what was attached to your original affidavit that we've just looked at, and you have signed a separate supplementary affidavit to correct that. Is that so?
Correct, Chair.
May I take you, please, in the same bundle to page 298?
Okay, I'm just going to go through to it quickly through electronics. Just a moment, Chair. I'm just going to it. Takes a little bit of time, Chair, going through the pages. Going to be there just now. Okay, I am. Chair, just the numbering again.
298.
Page 298, the black numbers on the left-hand corner.
I'm on it, Chair. Thank you.
Is that your supplementary affidavit?
That's correct, Chair.
And if I can take you to the second page, that's page 299. Is the first signature in the middle of the page your own?
Yes, Chair.
And again, you had this affidavit sworn and attested before Commissioner of Oaths. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
And have you been through this affidavit and satisfied yourself as to its truth and correctness?
I am. Thank you, Chair.
And is it correct that you have attached to that affidavit the relevant annexures that were missing from the attachments to your main affidavit?
Yes, after my request, it was given last week to me by the team, and it was attached as such. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. As I understand it, Mr. Knoetze, you did not have those documents originally when you prepared the main affidavit. That's why you didn't attach them to your affidavit, but the Commission was able to source copies of those documents, which your supplementary affidavit confirms are in fact the documents that are referred to in your main affidavit. Is that correct?
It's correct, Chair. It's correct, Chair, and you will also see in those paragraphs I refer specifically to those documents because I left already Denel at that point, so I refer to those specific annexures as far as I can recall. This was the following attachments and specifically reference to those attachments, but I did receive them last week and it was now included. Yes, thank you, Chair.
Right, thank you. Chair, may we then ask leave formally to have this supplementary affidavit with its annexures admitted. It is still in Denel bundle 08, and it appears from page 298. And I assume that, Chair, you would have that admitted as Exhibit 21.1.
It can either be 21.1 or 21.20, W22, depending on what seems to be fine in terms of the arrangement of the bundle.
Yes, W22 has already been allocated to a different exhibit, I'm afraid, Chair.
Yes, but does Exhibit W22 appear before the supplementary affidavit or after?
No, after.
Oh, okay, so we'll make it 21.1.
Thank you, Chair.
The supplementary affidavit of Mr. Pieter Knoetze, starting at page 298, is admitted as Exhibit W 21.1. Before Mr. Kennedy begins with his questions, Mr. Knoetze, I see that there seems to be a vast difference between your signature at page 296 on the supplementary affidavit and your signature at page 29 of your main affidavit. What can you say about that?
If I follow the question, Mr. Chair, it is a difference between the signature of two different pages.
Yeah, the signature that you say is yours on the supplementary affidavit is very different from the signature that you have said is yours on the main affidavit.
I must say, Chair, I find it difficult. The electronic copy does not have the signatures on. The one that I've opened does not have the signatures on my side. I do have all the signatures of the primary affidavit. So I cannot see, unfortunately, on the electronic one, it did not have the signed, the signatures on the supplementary one. It's difficult to respond there.
Okay, maybe a way can be found to let you see exactly what I see, and then you can deal with it later. Mr. Kennedy, do you know how that can be done in terms of technology, or does he have a hard copy, hard copies with him?
I believe the witness indicated he had a hard copy available to him. Mr. Knoetze, do you have a hard copy available there?
Mr. Chair, unfortunately, Advocate Kunene picked up last night very late the supplementary one, and it was the only one. I did not make copies for me after the signature, so he's taken the only one that we had the original in with him to be handed in. But
yes.
We can definitely, as the chairperson through you is asked, we can do the comparison at any time. I'm more than willing. It is accepted. We can do.
Well, I need to know when you might be able to have with you hard copies so that you can deal with it. What logistical arrangements need to be made to achieve that? Mr. Kennedy, do you know?
Chair, I think that we may be able to find a technological solution to this. Perhaps a photograph can be taken on a camera phone of the two signatures and sent to him.
Yes.
So that he can then look at it on the phone.
Okay.
I won't ask him for his phone number in public here. But I'm sure we have the phone numbers, and perhaps one of my colleagues. Now, just have a moment. Very much. I understand that our colleague will send him a photograph of each of the two signatures so that he can compare.
Okay, all right.
Perhaps we can stand down once we've dealt with the rest of his evidence and then complete with that. But I don't imagine that it should require a standing down of more than a few minutes.
Yes, okay.
Thank you, Chair. Unless you would prefer me to deal with that up front now.
I'm happy for us to continue in the meantime, if you are happy to do that on the basis that he has that both are his signatures.
Yes.
But I just see a vast difference, and so
They
he
are
can
indeed.
come in later, but if maybe it might be better to get this cleared before we start, and if it's going to take a few minutes, I'm happy to stand down for that purpose. Which one do you prefer?
Well, perhaps let's stand down now, Chair.
Yeah, okay, all right.
Let's get this out of the way before we deal with
Yes.
the rest.
Okay, all
Thank you,
right.
Chair.
Okay, I'll stand down. Probably 5 minutes will be more than enough.
I believe so.
But you let me know. You let me know once it's been sorted out. But it should not go to 10 minutes.
No, thank you, Chair.
Yeah. Okay, we adjourn.
All right.
Mr. Knoetze, are you still able to hear me?
Chair, if you can still hear me, I am ready whenever you are ready on that side.
Thank you. If you could just wait for the chair, please, Mr. Knoetze. Thank you, Chair. We are ready.
Yes. Has Mr. Knoetze been able to look at both signatures?
Yes, Chair.
Yeah.
Thank you for the opportunity. We apologise the legal team didn't pick up the discrepancy. So he's clarified to us what he has been sent, Chair, by members of the team are photographs both of the signature page of the main affidavit at page 32 and the signature page of the supplementary affidavit at page 299. So may I just ask him a few questions?
The first signature is on page 29, eh? Oh, no, page 32 in terms of the black numbers.
32.
Yes, I forgot we used the black numbers. Yes, so he has seen both now.
He's seen both. If I may just ask him a few questions on the record so
Yes,
that he can
okay, all right.
confirm it for the record.
Yes, okay.
Mr. Knoetze, is it correct what I've just said to the learned chair, that you've been sent a photograph of the signature page at page 32, which relates to the main affidavit? Is that correct?
That's 100%.
And also the signature page of the other affidavit, the supplementary at page 299. Did you receive that?
That's correct, Chair.
And you've looked at what appears there. May I just ask you, on page 31, let's look at page 31, please.
Quickly going to 31. Just give me a moment, Chair. It's the electronic version, quickly going through.
Will it be quicker if Mr. Knoetze uses hard copies than if he uses his computer?
Mr. Knoetze, do you have a hard copy of the main affidavit in front of you?
Yeah, we may.
Yes,
we may.
I also have, but that one doesn't have the, Mr. Chair, that one doesn't have numbers, so I'm going through the electronic. I'm at
Is
number
that so?
32 there.
Yes, I'm just scared that there is quite some delay before you get to
I'm afraid there is.
a page, and after an hour or 2 hours, we might have lost quite some time.
I think this will be the only instance. The witness referred me to his initials on the previous pages.
Yes, okay.
Mr. Knoetze, have you looked at the initials that appear on the earlier pages of the main affidavit, the bottom right-hand
Yes, I have,
side?
Chair.
And whose
I have,
initials,
Chair.
sorry, Chair, whose initials appear, the bottom right-hand of each of the pages before we get to 32?
Each of them are myself, my signature on the right-hand side. The left-hand side is the Commissioner of O1.
When you say your signature, do you mean signature or initials?
My initials.
Initials. Now, on page 32, the chairperson has referred you to the fact that above the typed word deponent, is the name PCJ Knoetze. Who wrote that in? Did you write that in?
It's my handwriting. It's exactly correct. Yes, Chair.
Is this your norm? Is this a signature or is this merely the handwriting of your name?
It was my handwriting, as my understanding was. This was necessary to put my handwriting in there.
Right. And then you have looked at the other photograph sent to you by phone, which is of page 299. It's in the supplementary affidavit.
299, is that correct, Chair?
Do you have that? And you've been sent a photograph of this as the signature page. There is typed halfway down the name Pieter Knoetze. That's your name, correct?
I'm close to that. I'm just going to go to 299 quickly. I'm on to. Close to 299, Chair. Just a moment.
Mr. Knoetze, in fact, my question was directed at the photograph that you've been sent just a few minutes ago.
Yeah, the photograph.
Perhaps if you would
100%
sorry, please don't talk over me when I'm asking you a question. We must each give each other a chance to finish. The photograph that was sent to you was of this page, the signature page for the supplementary affidavit. Is that correct?
Yes, Chair.
And if you can look at that, is that your signature that appears above the typed name Pieter Knoetze?
It is my handwriting of my, it is my handwriting, PCJ Knoetze, in my handwriting.
Yes, but is it handwriting where you're simply writing out your name or signing?
It is just writing out my name, Chair.
On page 299.
On 299, it is just my handwriting with my name, sir, Chair.
May I just take some guidance? Mr. Knoetze, I'm sorry, we need to try and get through this quickly. We've seen already that at the earlier page 32, what you did there was you didn't sign it, you wrote out your name in your handwriting, which is not your normal signature. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair. I did not a signature, but it was as deponent my initials and my surname.
Yes. But at page 299, what we have, and we've sent you a photograph of it, is where we see somebody has apparently signed above the typed name Pieter Knoetze. What I see above that is what appears to be somebody has signed it rather than writing out his or her name. If you could please look at the photograph that you've been sent by your phone.
I'm looking at the 32 that have been sent on the WhatsApp. There is no, in my
Mr.
WhatsApp that I
Knoetze,
received
I'm sorry to interrupt you. We've finished with page 32. I'm looking at page 299 now. Please look at the WhatsApp photograph that you've been sent of 299.
Okay, I've got that one. Is it the first one, Chair?
Yes, just before we look at the first one, can you just confirm, at the foot of the page you will see the Commissioner of Oaths has signed and he or she has inserted the date 8th of November 2020. Are we looking at the same document?
I'm looking at the same one, Chair.
Right, thank you. Now, above where the Commissioner of Oaths has signed, halfway down that page, the very first signature that appears on this page, above the typed name Pieter Knoetze, do you see that?
I see that.
Is that a signature or is that your name?
This is my signature.
Your signature,
Yeah.
right. So we have in the main affidavit, although it has your initials throughout, you didn't put your signature, you wrote your name, but in this affidavit we have this page which shows your signature. Is that correct?
100% correct, Chair.
Right. Is there any reason, I'm not trying to catch you out or criticize you, but is there any reason why you used your signature on the supplementary affidavit, on this page we're looking at, but instead of putting your signature to the main affidavit, you put your name in handwriting?
Chair, if I must be honest, I think it was done late last night. I had to rush through this and I had it done at the specific Commissioner of Oaths house to quickly get this done, and I could have probably also have signed that page where I did my PCJ Knoetze in, and then we had to quickly rush it to get it through Advocate Kuneni to the court. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Knoetze. But do you confirm again that each of these two affidavits, the main one in which you simply initialed and wrote your name, and the supplementary one which you initialed and signed, both of those, in fact, are your affidavits, and you confirm under oath that you have taken this morning that their contents are true and correct?
100%, Chair. I confirm that is the case.
Right, thank you. Now,
Okay, no, that's fine. But you see, this first one was signed deposed to in September, not yesterday, September 23. Was it just your understanding that all you were required to do is just put your initials and surname? Or did somebody say that's what you needed to do? Because you see the certificate of the Commission of Oaths underneath your name there says thus signed and sworn to before me. So it's supposed to be signed, but obviously some people sign in such a way that it's just initials and surname, so the Commissioner of Oaths won't know whether that's your signature or not. Was it your understanding that you should just put in the initials and the surname, or what was the position? Because that one is not the one, it's the supplementary affidavit that you did yesterday, where you may have rushed, but this was September 23.
Yes, Chair, that was my understanding, but I can again, Chair, I can confirm these are both my statements and
Yes.
Signed and
Okay.
sealed by me, myself, Chair.
No, that's fine. Let's continue. You may continue.
Thank you, Chair. If you would like it, we could, of course, ask the witness to re-sign the original affidavit with a proper signature, but I don't know if you require it after the evidence is
Yeah,
given.
no, I think it's fine because he is confirming under oath that
Indeed.
the contents are true and correct. Yeah, it's
Thank
just
you.
that
Thank you, Chair.
when I picked it up, it seemed very strange.
It's quite a striking difference.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, all right.
Right, Mr. Knoetze, thank you. We've got that issue out of the way now. If we can now deal with some of the things that you say in your affidavit. You previously worked for...
Just 1 second, Mr. Kennedy. It's very dark where Mr. Kennedy is. I don't know whether something must be done with that light. You may continue, Mr. Kennedy. It's just that
Thank
that's
you,
much
Chair.
better.
I think the previous week's curtains were open so that we got a bit more natural light, which seemed to help.
Oh, okay. Well, then
But the light that has just been adjusted seems to help me. But thank you for looking after
it
my
helps. But if the
situation.
curtains can be attended to as well, that would help.
Thank you
Okay,
very
all right.
much, Chair.
Thank you.
Mr. Knoetze, you were previously employed at Denel Land Systems, is that right?
Correct, Chair.
We're going to call it DLS for short in these proceedings, as you have in your affidavit. When did you start in the Denel Group as an employee?
Chair, I started in 1989, Chair.
And when did you leave?
I left Denel 2 years ago, 2018, in May 2018, Chair.
And
So
on what?
That sounds like you had one employer throughout all those years. Is that correct? From 1989.
Chair, I just...
It looks like you had one employer from 1989 to when you left 2 years ago. That's quite a long time.
Yes, Chair. Previously, I worked with Transnet before that, but since 1989 until I left Denel, I was
With Denel. Yeah, okay. Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you, Chair. Now, you mentioned in your affidavit that you hold a BCom degree. I understand in consultation with my learned colleagues, you indicated you have an additional degree as well. What is that?
I also, Mr. Chair, I hold an MBA at the University of Pretoria, Chair.
Right, thank you. Now, when you left in 2018, Mr. Knoetze, what position did you hold at DLS?
I was the executive of business excellence, Chair.
And your affidavit refers to you as being the Chief Financial Officer. Is that correct?
I was the Chief Financial Officer until March 2015, And then I was, through a mentoring program, appointing a young, new, innocent causa person into the role of CFO, and I was then given a position as business excellence within the LS in March 2015.
Right. Now, you have dealt in your affidavit with your responsibilities. Can I take you to page 6, please? 006, I'll just call it 6.
Yes, Chair.
And you refer to your responsibilities as CFO, being financial planning, financial reporting, general ledgers, bank transactions, and petty cash. Did you still have responsibility for those issues when you became executive for business excellence?
No, Chair. No.
On the previous page, 05, it indicates that you were reporting to various people, Mr. Durka, Mr. Ehlers, Mr. Volhuter, Mr. Burger, Mr. Mhlontlo, and Mr. Sadiq. It was that at different times of your employment.
That's correct, sir, Chair.
And then you say I reported to the last two managers, that's Mr. Mhlontlo, on a dotted line to Denel corporate office. Just explain what you mean by that.
At the time of this process that we were, the investigators were going through, I was reporting on a direct line within the division where the CEO was Mr. Burger, directly to him. But my dotted line as a functional also responsibility on finance, I reported to Mr. Fikile Mhlontlo, and also also a dotted line to Mr. Sadiq as the CEO, and it could be that he was still the acting CEO at that point, and that was my alternative responsibilities, and to make sure that there's proper peer processes in place on functional issues, Chair.
Right. Once you were made executive for business excellence, did you still report to anybody?
Also to Mr. Burger still, yes.
I see. Now, while you were CFO, were you familiar with the requirements of the supply chain management policy of Denel?
Yes, Chair, I was not personally responsible for it, but I was in all the management meetings where we had discussions with regards to the supply chain process, and where there were applicable interactions between finance and supply chain where it needs to be followed. All that interactions I was part of in the management team, Chair.
Was that what was called the DLS Exco?
That's correct, Chair.
And you formed part of that?
I was part of the management team, Chair. Yes.
Yes. Were you part of that management team throughout your period as CFO?
If I recall correctly, I think so, Chair. It's a long time ago, but I think probably most of the time I would have been part of the management team. Yes, Chair.
And you were still part of that management team when you ceased to be CFO and you became business excellence executive, correct?
Yes, Chair.
Did you carry on sitting on the Exco once you changed your role from CFO to executive business excellence?
Correct, Chair.
And so were you still on the Exco throughout that period that you were the executive for business excellence until you left the employ of Denel in mid-2018?
Yes, Chair. I have to actually qualify that as the last year of my service before, and as I started to get specifically more ill with my chronic condition, I was nominated as part of, I think it was a group of 4 or 5 people to assist DCO in corporate affairs to help with the end state of Denel at that point, where I did some work for almost a year or close to 6 months and later and longer to actually help and see where we can take Denel on strategic matters and going forward on the end state chair.
Right. Now, in your affidavit, you've indicated that you would provide an advisory support role to the CEO and the SCM unit, Supply Chain Management Unit at DLS. Can you explain to the Chair, please, briefly what that entailed? Why did you play such a role? And what sort of role did you in fact play?
Yeah, I think, Chair, if we can just start with the financial one, it was always my responsibility to make sure that all financial matters should be reported and be directed to the CEO to update him in terms of the every latest developments and also big decisions to be made with regards to the delegation of authority, but also then on supply chain through my interaction with the management team and as executive. We also had a project financial office where we had interactions with supply chain from a financial point of view, just to make sure that there's support to supply chain with possible price negotiations or contract conditions if needed in certain cases, Chair.
Right. Now, in your main affidavit, you deal with LMT, the entity known as LMT, correct?
Correct, Chair.
And ultimately, LMT had a majority shareholding in that company purchased by Denel. Is that right?
Correct, Chair.
Now, what was your own involvement in relation to the period when it was being acquired, when the shares were being sold to Denel, the majority shares? Were you involved in the background that led up to the contract being signed that sold those shares to Denel?
Chair, it is a short question with a long answer. I can, to make it a bit brief, I can state that during the 2008 and 9 period, the quotes for the contract, for the Tranian contract that we'll talk about maybe later, was going through with regards to the Hoefyster contract production order that was anticipated to be placed on DLS to the value of approximately 10 billion. And my involvement was on management level to make sure that that when we get the order, we will be ready for production, and that going forward, we need to have the governance in place and with the different board meetings on DLS and the Denel side, we need to adhere to the delegations as well as the good governance to be able to make sure there's either or, as will become later visible, securities and whatever is needed in the option agreements when we acquire LMT later on. But at first, during 2008 and 9 and 10, my involvement was mainly to get involved through request by the CEO and Denel and board members to get involved in the financials at LMT and to make sure that they have a sound financial situation going forward, and specifically if we want to acquire the majority 51% shares, we should make sure that there is sustainable financial business. Later on, when the share option, which was a different process, started, it was mainly driven by Mr. Morris, who previously worked for DPE, and he was the person who was really instigating the execution of the share option, although I was very much involved in all of the different discussions on the option agreements and support to wherever I had to, whether it was management or to Mr. Morris with the application to DPE. Mr. Morris was actually the single point accountability person to do the full share option execution by that time, Chair.
Okay, so Mr. Knoetze, before the shares were actually bought by Denel in LMT, was LMT's financial strength considered by you? Did you look at the financial position of LMT?
Yes, I was requested to make sure that due to, at that time, they were a critical capability, strategic capability that we needed to have security of supply, and I was requested to intervene and see what the financial position are and whether they will be able to sustain the business going forward for the Hoefyster contract, Chair.
Now, LMT, before its majority shares were sold to Denel, was already a long existing supplier to Denel. Is that right?
Just to repeat, Chair, I missed the first part.
LMT, before a majority share in LMT was sold to Denel, LMT for some years had already been a supplier of items of equipment to Denel, correct?
I understand so, Chair. I was not so involved previous years with LMT. I know they were a supplier for some time. I really become involved in their financial affairs really when I was asked to do so in 2008 and 9, Chair. That is so, yeah.
And what did you understand the purpose be to buy the shares, for Denel to buy the shares in LMT? What was the business objective?
Sorry, Chair. The business objective all the way was that DLS had a strategic objective to combine capabilities for the industry to have a total integrated system level approach to our clients. What that means, Chair, is that we wanted to be a one-stop, single source supplier to any client, local or overseas. And for that, Chair, we really wanted to have all capabilities of a level 5 business from start to end into one business. And for that reason, we have always presented to the DLS and the Denel board, and also specifically on our budget presentations, the position that we wanted to have an integrated capability that includes also the capabilities at LMT, Chair, and that was our objective.
Right. Now, you say that you, at the request of your management, you did look into the financial health of LMT before the shares were sold to Denel. What overall was your conclusion? What was the outcome of your findings?
Chair, I think the two main issues that came out was, the one was that there wasn't a big or good oversight over the financials in LMT, as they have not had a specific financial person looking after the financials, as it was a business that was done by a few individuals or run by a few individuals with not much financial knowledge. And the other one, sir, Chair, would be to have made sure and to have seen the risk of them being sustainable going forward and having had the financial backing to execute the Hoefyster contract for the turret house, Chair.
Now, you have dealt in your affidavit with monies that were paid over to LMT as advance payments. Are you aware of those, any advance payments being made by DLS to LMT during the period you were CFO?
Yes, Chair.
Now, how much was paid and when?
It was 12.7 million on a work on risk procurement work on risk order, which was placed the 29th of April 2010. And the monies that was paid at 12.7 was 25% prepayment on almost 52 million rand work on risk order to LMT. And the monies was paid from of the 29th of April 2010 and a few weeks later, the full complement of that, Chair.
Now, some witnesses have given evidence to the Commission that the advance payments made to LMT were something out of the ordinary, that they were not truly advance payments, they were actually really just disguised as advance payments to try and channel money to LMT because it was in financial difficulty. What is your own view of it?
Chair, my view is that after the interaction with the Denel, DLS and Denel members of the board, various reports were given of the situation at LMT with regards to security of supply and possible penalties on the Hoefyster contract, as well as the IP that was vested in LMT, and they were seen as a very critical strategic asset and supply. And for that reason, we had various presentations and discussions, which is attached as some of the annexures and discussion, whereby we presented the case where a work on risk situation order, which is not out of the norm, it happened in other cases for long lead items as well, if it was needed, to place that order to start making prepayments so that there is stability in the financials and that it's a sustainable business when the Hoefyster does start with the production of 10 billion that we have security of supply, and that should be able to protect Denel in the case of possible late deliveries, Chair.
Is it not correct, though, that LMT was at that stage facing serious financial difficulties?
They were facing financial difficulties, Chair, yes.
To what extent? Was there just a shortfall in cash flow, or was it a matter far worse than that, that its own survival was at stake?
Chair, I think if I recall correctly, I think they had still a good order book. I think that there was good business. It was mainly, I think, that the past where they had a very big growth in business. And actually, I think, if I recall correctly, they were growing too fast to be able to fund specifically all the working capital requirements for the growth in business. And for that reason, they ran out of specifically capital to be able to turn their working capital into cash to be able to pay their creditors for the short term and then be longer term sustainable, Chair.
Now, if I can take you in your affidavit to page 13, just bear in mind the guidance given to you earlier, the top left-hand page number, page 13.
Yes, sir. Chair. Correct. I'm there, sir. Chair.
Now, you refer in paragraph 7.1 to approval being given for an at-risk production order, and you realize that a payment of 1.1 million rand would need to be paid before the end of April 2010. So it was 1.1 payable before the end of April, correct?
Correct, Chair.
Then you go in 7.2 to say this. During this process of discussion with regards to the first payment to be made to LMT to pay off Busisa Investments, Bowden and Company, who were they?
Chair, I missed the last part. Who were they?
Yes, who was Busisa Investments / Bowden and Company?
Chair, it was, as far as I can recall, a company that had given money and loaned money to LMT and were requesting payback, or alternatively, they had clauses where they can actually get their fingers within LMT and take some specific actions against LMT and also demand some specific, probably shareholding, if I recall correctly. They had a hold on LMT, Chair.
So LMT owed them money, correct?
Right. Chair.
Sorry, just speak clearly, please. Say it again.
Correct, Chair.
And what was that money for?
I cannot recall, Chair. Probably also cash for working capital to pay creditors or the normal run of the business, cash requirement.
Yes. So, Busisa Investments and Bowden and Company had made funds available to LMT, which now owed it back. That was a separate transaction, was it not, from the work that LMT was doing for Denel?
Correct, Chair.
Correct. So I can understand a 1.1 million rand being payable for at-risk production in terms of the normal arrangements by the end of April 2010. But why was Denel looking at LMT and its obligation to Busisa Investments, Bowden and Company? Why was there consideration being given to Denel money being made available to LMT, which would then pass it on to Busisa and Bowden?
Chair, the decision was always made when we did the presentations and discussions is that there were not just this 1.1, but there were a few critical payments that had to be made by LMT to be able to be, on the short to medium term, to be put on the right track in terms of the cash flow from working capital perspective. As far as I can remember, there were also SARS payments that they were in default. So there was specific amounts that were discussed and on our board meeting and management meetings where there were monies to be paid to take them through the difficult time to get to the point where they can start unlocking some of the working capital in stock and debtors to be able to go forward again and execute the rest of their business sustainably, Chair.
So you would have had a contract, DLS would have had a contract with LMT for the production of the particular items concerned, correct?
Correct, Chair.
And that would have involved agreement on the price, what amount had to be paid, correct?
Correct, Chair.
And at what stage different portions of the price would have to be paid. So much would be paid on X date, so much would be paid on Y date, etc. Correct?
That's the norm to have in a contract, yes, Chair.
Indeed. Now, why didn't you simply make funds available to LMT, taking account of what Denel had to pay LMT in terms of that order or contract? Why was there even discussion about LMT's problems in relation to its creditors and its suppliers and Busisa Bowden and its tax liability, etc.? Why was that being taken into account by Denel in deciding on an advance payment?
The only possible solution in such a case with security of supplier that were in difficulty was on this exact method of placing a work on risk pending later than the approval, which is the security, which is the placement of the production order of 10 billion rand from Armscor. And for that reason, we used the process to do the work on risk as discussed through all the executives and peers within the environment, to do it on a proper way in which it can be accounted for later and not just sending money from left to right, but to have a proper discussion in terms of which is the best way to channel payments in a proper way. And then if the Hoefyster production order does arrive, it could be handled appropriately and properly, Chair.
So am I right in this understanding of the approach that was adopted? Because LMT was financially in some difficulty and there was a danger that continued supply from LMT for your very important Hoefyster project could be in danger due to their financial difficulties, you and your colleagues agreed to structure the payments to them in a way which would go beyond what the contractual terms for payment were. It was really to assist them to get payment earlier than they might otherwise have got, so that they didn't collapse financially and then the supply to Denel would be in danger. Is my understanding correct, Mr. Knoetze?
It's correct, Chair, with also just a little bit to add to that is, and during these discussions, having the process of work on risk approval and the upfront security of supply, the idea was also then when later when we get the, or parallel to getting the production order for Hoefyster of 10 billion, we need to secure an option to purchase them to also safeguard and put the security in place to actually execute the option agreement later on as a specific purchasing whereby our money would be safe with the necessary securities to put in place by that time also, Chair.
So is my understanding correct? There were two ways that Denel identified as securing the supply to try and minimize the danger of financial collapse of LMT. The one was to restructure the arrangement so that it would get some money upfront in advance on the on the basis that you've already dealt with at risk production order, and the other was to purchase a majority shareholding in LMT itself. Is that correct?
Correct, sir.
Okay, thank you. Now, if you look still at page 13, your paragraph 7.2, you deal with the discussions that took place in relation to the first payment to be made to LMT to pay off Busisa and Bowden, which we've discussed already. It says that yourself and Mr. Tubis had discussions with Mr. Burger to explore the option of the first payment to be made before the end of April 2010. Now, is it correct that you and Mr. Tubis, together with Mr. Burger, played a leading role in relation to this arrangement for early payment of LMT to try and help it out of its financial difficulties?
Yes, Chair. But as I also stated somewhere in my affidavit, that we always kept the management team part of these discussions, and it was various deliberations at our management team. But we also involved definitely the legal person in DLS at that point in time, as well as the legal and finance executives from the corporate office continuously, Chair.
Right. In fact, I understand
Mr.
that...
Kennedy, I
Sorry,
see
Chair.
we just gone by 2 minutes past the tea break. Shall we take the tea break now?
Thank you, Chair. Yes.
We'll take the tea break and resume at 25 to 12.
Thank you,
We
Chair.
adjourn.
Mr. Knoetze, can you hear me? Mr. Knoetze, can you hear me?
I can certainly, Chair, I can hear you loud.
Right, so the chairperson, Judge Zondo, has just adjourned for 15 minutes for the tea adjournment. We will resume at 25 to.
All rise.
Okay, let's continue.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Knoetze, are you able to hear us?
I can, Chair.
Thank you. Can I take you to page Mr. Knoetze, I understand that there was one annexure that was not fixed up through your supplementary affidavit, but has now been fixed up. If I can take you to what Mr. Kunene has sent you, I understand. It is the board meeting extract from the 15th of April 2010 that is referred to in your affidavit. And I understand, Chair, that it has been sent to the witness and now appears at page 52.1.
Sorry,
Yes.
Chair, is the board meeting Chair, board meeting of when?
15 April 2010.
15 April 2010.
As yet, until today, I've not seen that. I've requested it from Denel previously, Chair, but I've not seen the recollection I had in my affidavit is what I could remember or recall from those meetings.
Yeah.
But I have not seen it until today. I've requested for it.
But have you received it from the commission now? You have not received it.
No, Chair.
Chair, I have been told it has been sent to the witness. Perhaps it hasn't come through the email yet.
Yes.
But perhaps, Mr. Knoetze, will you please, after the hearing, may I suggest this, Chair, subject to your
Yes.
guidance?
Yeah.
May I suggest to you, Mr. Knoetze, that after the hearing, you go through what has just recently been sent to you by email and just confirm that what has been sent to you is in fact the minutes of that board meeting of the 15th of April 2010. And if it is correct, then you don't need to come back to, well, perhaps you should email the legal team and say, yes, I confirm that what Mr. Kunene has sent me is in fact the correct document. If it's not, if you can tell us, please, and then we will have it corrected. Chair, I hope that that will be in order.
That would be in order, but I see that it's really, 3 pages.
Yes, I think it's 4 or 5 pages, Chair.
But seems that the substantive page is only actually once, and I say substantive, full page.
Yes.
It may be that depending on where we will be by lunchtime, it may be that it might be convenient if during the lunch break he has a look at it. When we come back, he confirms or whatever.
And he
or
can
if we finish with him much earlier, maybe if we take 5 minutes, 7 minutes, he can look at it and
Thank you, Chair.
we come back and he can confirm, and
Yes.
then he's done.
Thank you, Chair. That should work well. Thank you very much.
Okay, all right.
Right, Mr. Knoetze, when you're finished with your evidence, if you can just look at what has been sent, just to confirm, and we'll be in touch with you as well during that period. You may have to come back online today, just for a minute or so, to tell the chairperson that this is the document that you were referring to in your affidavit. Is that okay?
It's correct with me.
Fine, thank you.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Now, I'd like to go back, if I may, to the discussion we were having about the prepayments to LMT and the reason why these were made. Was it appropriate and was it regular? Was it in accordance with the law and with the processes at Denel, as you understood them, to make an early payment to LMT earlier than what it was entitled to in terms of the contract or order, so that you could assist it in its financial difficulties?
Chair, if in this case, on the delegation of authority, it was quite clear after having discussions with the board members and Mr. Fikile Mhlontlo and Mr. Talib, it was quite clear that in the case of a work on risk approval for a situation like this that is ordered in advance of receiving a sales order for a contract like Hoefyster, the requirement or the condition would be that there needed to be then specifically securities in place to cover the company or to protect the company if the supplier, or in this case LMT, would go down. And it was accepted, and it was a delegation of authority that was within the DLS board mandate on operational matters to go through this way of prepayment, but with proper securities like we have done for the different payments to LMT, Chair.
Did you discuss the risks that were attached to the early payment that was made? Did you discuss that with your colleagues on Exco, the financial risks that there may have been?
Yes, Chair, in actual fact, we had various discussions on the different risks, as is also can be seen from the 7 May 2010 minutes of the DLS board meeting. But we also had discussions when the due diligence was done by KPMG. It was presentations made by KPMG to a diverse team from DLS and from corporate office and DCO, meaning the legal people were presented and also the financial people from DCO to understand the situation around LMT and the risks involved, so that we take an informed decision with management in that regard. Yeah.
May I take you in the papers to page 89?
Chair.
Now, am I correct in understanding that what follows from page 89 is a report from KPMG?
Chair, just to make sure, are you on 39 or 89?
89, sorry, 89.
Oh, I'm just going to go to 89. It is correct, Chair. It is the KPMG, one of the reports from KPMG that was given to Denel on our integrated meetings on the finances, Chair.
Sorry, on your integrated what?
When we discussed and requested KPMG to do the financial due diligence, they have made presentations to a multi-functional team of DLS and DCO, and this was the report that was presented to all of the people that was present in the meetings when we discussed the different points from KPMG, Chair.
Was this a due diligence report prepared by KPMG at the request of Denel to check the due diligence of LMT to see whether it was suitable to have its majority shareholding purchased by Denel?
That's correct, Chair.
Right. And do you agree that the KPMG report, in fact, identified a number of factors, a number of issues that were of some concern in relation to the financial strength of LMT?
That's correct, Chair.
For example, they identified concern that there had been a distortion of gross profitability, and as a result, one could not rely on the reported profitability. Are you aware of that?
That was mentioned, Chair, and that was where we had various discussions on how we could get involved to understand the financials better to make sure we take an informed decision, Chair.
Yes. And then they referred to a prepayment from Denel of 14.5 million and another 1.2 million from Patria. They dealt with that. Was there in fact 14.5 million made as a prepayment by Denel?
No, Chair. I assume that could be VAT included maybe on the 12.7. It could be the VAT portion, Chair. I'm not sure. It could be the
I
VAT
see.
portion included.
Yes. And they identified concern that this was included in LMT's books as being deferred income. You aware of that?
I can't recall that, Chair. I'm sorry. No, I can't recall.
Right. And they also identified a concern that LMT would require a capital injection of at least 43.4 million rand.
That's correct, Chair.
Yes. I'm sorry, Chairman, I just have a moment.
Okay.
Thank you. So, Mr. Knoetze, these concerns that you acknowledge were put in the due diligence report by KPMG, surely they raised some alarm bells on your part as Chief Financial Officer at that time of DLS, correct?
Correct, Chair.
And nonetheless, you approved and you recommended rather for approval the purchase by Denel of a majority shareholding in LMT.
Chair, just a correction on that. I was mostly involved directly in the prepayment and the work on risk specific order, which was investigated by or requested by the team, but specifically on the 51% option shareholding, I was part of only one person as part of a much bigger team that actually made the decision to acquire the option and to execute the option later on. That had to follow a total different process, which had to go to the Denel board and to the Minister for approval, Chair.
Yes. I certainly accept, Mr. Knoetze, that you weren't the only person, and in fact you didn't have the power at your level to make any final decision on the purchase of those shares in LMT, correct?
Correct.
But you did play a role in looking into the financial strength of LMT, not so?
Correct, Chair.
And that was for purposes of considering whether it was a good idea from a business and financial risk point of view for Denel to purchase the majority shareholding. Is that right?
Correct, Chair.
And you, in fact, I understand, in fact, signed the letter of engagement with KPMG for them to do the due diligence report. Is that right?
Correct, Chair.
I understand that Investec were also involved as transaction advisors for purpose of the transaction for the purchase of the LMT shareholding. Is that right?
Correct, Chair.
And were you involved in the appointment of Investec then for that role?
As far as I can recall, Chair, the Investec had gone through a supply chain process at DLS, and within that process we had present the legal team from DCO, the finance, and also the different representatives from DLS, and they were subsequently appointed as the advisors, Chair.
Yeah. Now, I understand you've told the chairperson about why you felt at the time that the advance payments of about 12 million rand to LMT was justified and the risks were properly addressed. But later, have you now, as you sit now, giving evidence before the learned chairperson of the commission, do you now feel that in retrospect, with hindsight, it was actually a good acquisition for Denel to have purchased a majority shareholding in LMT
Chair,
from a financial point of view.
if I was in the same position today as I was at that time, with all the evidence in front of me, with all the advice I had from Investec, my peers, my supervisors, the DCO specialist in terms of the strategy of Denel and DLS going forward, the execution of a 10 billion rand contract with subsequent penalties for, and starting off with the late delivery, which would be 10 times or more worse than having invested some money in a critical strategic supplier. I would probably do the same and make the same decision today, Chair. And then secondly, I think if Denel had thereafter, after acquiring the option or acquiring the 51% share, have done what we needed to do in terms of proper integration and management of the integrated facilities and what needed to be done like we envisaged, I think it would have been a big success story forever thereafter. That is my current statement on that, Chair.
But that in fact didn't happen, did it? LMT has actually continued to struggle, not so?
Chair, difficult to say. I got less involved after the PFMA approval. They were still a business. They were operating. They were executing their orders in the years 2012-13. But I got much less involved. And when the integration took place and the option was then acquired or executed, the integration took place at DCO, and it was subsequently managed from there on further. So my involvement was very, very less thereafter after the acquisition, Chair.
May I take you in your affidavit to page 25?
Just quickly going to 25, Chair.
You have that? You have that, Mr. Knoetze?
Almost there.
Okay.
Yes, Chair.
You say in 12.1, under the heading, how was the prepayment used by LMT? The 12.7 million rand prepayment was a decision by the DLS board as an at-risk production order placed on LMT to ensure security of supply on the Hoefyster contract. Now, the DLS board is different from the EXCO, is that right?
That's correct, Chair.
Were you sitting on the DLS board at this time?
I was, Chair.
In your capacity as Chief Financial Officer, you sat on the board, correct?
Correct, Chair.
I understand that at the level of EXCO, Mr. Burger, your CEO, and yourself as CFO, and Mr. Tubis as your co-executive, you were really the main players, as it were, on EXCO. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair, and probably because of our interaction, as this was the three of us that were representing the management team at the board level or board meetings as invitees.
Right. So am I correct in understanding you played a leading role along with the two other men that I've just mentioned in taking the decision to recommend to the board that this advance payment be approved?
Correct.
Correct.
Chair.
And then you sat on the board itself that then did approve the transaction. Is that correct?
Correct.
And Mr. Tubis, was he also sitting on the board at the time?
As an invitee, as far as I can remember, correct, Chair.
And Mr. Burger was too, not so?
Correct, Chair.
Right. And then at page 26, your affidavit refers in paragraph 12.3 to the cash injection, how it was used by LMT. It was used to pay their creditors and to fund current operations for maximum production. Is that correct? Mr. Knoetze, is that correct?
Correct, Chair.
That's how LMT used the payment. Would you agree that if LMT had not been facing serious financial difficulties, you would have not arranged the 12 million rand advance payments? The only reason why you were making available the 12 million upfront as an advance payment, the so-called advance payment, was because they were in financial difficulties. If they'd not been in financial difficulties, there would have been no need to pay them the 12 million. Is that correct?
Chair, the main objective was that we needed to have a sustainable business in them to be able to protect the IP that was vested in them and to have the security of supply. And for that reason, I was requested by not just the management team and the CEO of DLS, but also by DCO and the board members, after careful discussions and considerations, to get involved and to determine the risk associated with this. And the payment was merely a method of getting to the ultimate objective that we needed to get to, is for security of supply. That was the main objective all the way along, Chair.
If I understand you correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, as I understand it, when it became apparent that LMT was in financial difficulties, there was a concern on the part of head office and DLS management that if LMT fails financially because of its wider financial problems, then we are at risk. Correct?
Correct, Chair.
And one of those risks would be an IP risk, correct? An intellectual property risk, correct?
Correct, Chair.
And other risks too. There would be a continuity of supply. There would be an interruption in supply problem, not so?
Correct,
Is that right?
Chair.
But if they had been financially strong and at no risk of financial collapse, these concerns about interrupting supply and intellectual property wouldn't have arisen, not so?
Most probably, Chair, yes.
Okay, thank you. Chair, may I just have a moment to confer with my team?
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Just a few questions, if I may, just to conclude your evidence, Mr. Knoetze. Can I take you in your affidavit? Just find the page. Yes, it is at page 10, 010.
Going, Chair, to page 10. Yes, Chair.
Now, I'd like to just read into the record a paragraph or two of your affidavit so we get the context. You're here dealing with the advance payment to LMT. In 6.15, you say the whole process of placing an order on LMT was discussed with Mr. Morris. It's the same Mr. Morris you mentioned earlier, is that right?
That's correct, Chair.
And Mr. Mhlontlo, he was then Chief Financial Officer of the group at head office level, is that right?
Correct, Chair.
As is evident through communications, and you referred to annexures, Mr. Morris was comfortable with the process followed. Mr. Morris was the strategy, PFMA compliance and equity transaction specialist. That was also at head office, correct?
Correct, Chair.
And then it says he worked with DPE, that's the Department of Public Enterprises, correct?
As far as I can recall, that was his, he was at DPE previously.
So he'd been there for many years, your affidavit says. And he made it clear, and here I'm reading in 6.16, Mr. Morris made it clear that the LMT prepayment was to be secured with LMT assets and not only the share option. He also separated the two matters of the order placements and the exercise of the share option. He made it clear in his email that there is no PFMA process that needs to be followed for the placement of the 51 million rand at-risk order on LMT and its subsequent prepayment, and that it's a matter that can be dealt with by the DLS board. The exercise of the share option was a different matter, and further due diligence needed to be done, according to him, and that Denel board approval and PFMA approval was needed in that regard. That's the share option part. But the prepayment, the at-risk order placement, you say he said you did not need to, you had no difficulties in relation to the PFMA. Is that right?
Correct, Chair.
There's no PFMA process. Now,
hang on 1 second. Where you say in that paragraph, namely 6.16 at the end thereof, you said the exercise of the share option was a different matter, and further due diligence needed to be done according to him, and that Denel board approval and PFMA approval was needed in this regard. Is that approval meant to be processed? Because if it is meant to be approval, I would like to know whose approval would it have been?
yes, thank you, Chair. Mr. Knoetze, at the end of paragraph 6.17, you refer to approvals being required for the share option part. You see that right at the end of 6.16?
Yes, Chair.
And you said that according to him, that's Denel, Morris, according to him, and that Denel board approval and PFMA approval was needed in this regard. Now, Denel board approval, we understand, but who would have to give approval under the PFMA?
Chair, as stipulated previously or discussed, the work on risk approval was a separate process that had to be dealt with the DLS board and with interaction with all the different representatives from the group. But specifically on stating in 6.17, the option and specifically the exercising of the option was a PFMA approval that had to go to the Denel, not DLS, but Denel board with proper presentation and then an application thereafter to DPE or the minister for a formal ministerial approval before the option can be executed to acquire the 51% shareholding, Chair.
So is the position that the reference to approval in that last line of paragraph 6.16 was intended by you, as you understood what Mr. Morris said, was intended to refer to approval, not process? Can you see the last line of paragraph 6.16?
Yes, Chair. That was revealed to us by Mr. Morris, specifically since he has been aware, was aware of the process that had to be followed on the Denel board approvals on delegations, as well as the PFMA approval that was, in his opinion, the way to go ahead in the formal approval of that, Chair.
And that PFMA, well, the first thing that attracted my attention to that last part of paragraph 6.16 is that earlier in the paragraph, you said, Mr. Morris said there was no PFMA process that needed to be followed for the placement of the 51 million rand at risk order on LMT and its subsequent prepayment. Is what you are talking about in that last line, this PFMA approval, does not relate to the same transaction? Because if it does, it would seem to create some inconsistency between what you understood Mr. Morris to say, because if there was no PFMA process needed, there could not be any PFMA approval required, I would imagine. Do you understand what I say? Do you understand?
The paragraph should be read in two parts or two different processes. As the first part, which I refer to as the 51 million risk and order, with the appropriate or the subsequent prepayment of 12.7 was on the delegation of authority, no Denel board approval, no PFMA process, and could be decided and approved by the DLS board with interaction from all the different stakeholders on DCO. That was not linked and actually to total separate process, although they could run parallel. It was a total separate process that could be approved on DLS board level to make to put the risk on order and also to make the prepayments. The second portion, which is the last part, the latter part of 6.16, refers specifically to the option, specifically the 51% shareholding option, which was an altogether total different process, because what needs to happen there is there needs to be a proper motivation to the Denel board and recommended to the Denel board to be approved by the Denel board to go to the minister that needs to give a formal approval, but specifically on the share option agreement to be executed, Chair.
You see, I understand all of that, but only if you go up to Denel approval before and PFMA approval was needed in this regard. Actually, of course, I'm not an expert on PFMA, but it sounds odd to me that in regard to exercising a share option, you would need PFMA processes, but I may be misunderstanding something. I don't know, Mr. Kennedy, is there something I'm missing here?
There may be some requirement under PFMA,
yes.
Chair.
Yes.
I don't propose to deal with that
yes.
In cross-examination with
yes,
this witness.
But there may be some.
There
may be some requirement.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, Mr. Knoetze. So your understanding that is that what Mr. Morris said, because it's what he said that you are relaying here, is that what he said was that for the exercise of the share option, one of the things that would be required is what he referred to as PFMA approval. Is that right?
That's 100% correct.
But you yourself, do you know what that is and under what provision it applies, or is that something you don't know? It's just your understanding of what he said.
Chair, I was aware of the fact that buying or selling of any shares within any transaction with Denel at that stage was definitely for sure a PFMA approval, and had to be approved by the government and Department of Public Enterprise, Chair.
So was your understanding that what is referred to as PFMA approval related to approval by the relevant minister? Is that?
Yes, first, of course, it had to go through the Denel board.
Yes.
In my opinion, for sure, the Denel board had to approve or recommend then to the minister for approval from DPE side, definitely, Chair.
Oh, okay, okay. Now I think I may have come across some provision in relation to maybe Denel, maybe in the application that was brought by the Denel board against the then Minister of Finance, Mr. Godan, for section, don't know if it was called section 54 application.
Yeah.
I think I may have come across something that might indicate what you are saying.
Yes.
Okay, so no, at least now I have an idea what the PFMA approval, the reference to PFMA approval may have been a reference to. Thank you, Mr. Knoetze. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Knoetze, for clarification, you refer in your affidavit to an annexure, which is an email from Mr. Morris. Can I ask you please to turn to page 38?
Going to page 38, Chair. I am at page 38, Chair.
Thank you. If I can take you on page 38 to the email in the middle of the page, it comes from Mr. John Morris, dated 22nd of April 2010, and is addressed to you with copies to various other officials, including Mr. Tubus, Mr. Mhlontlo, Mr. Sadiq, and Mr. Van Wyk and Mr. Stefan Berger, correct?
Correct, Chair.
I'd just like to read into the record the brief email, if I may. Thank you for the draft board paper. We've decided not to subject this to the Denel board meeting on 4 May 2010. In line with your discussion with Fikile, now that's with Mr. Mhlontlo, is that correct?
Correct, Chair.
The advanced payment to LMT needs to be secured by adequate LMT assets, which are currently unsecured. This is something we would want to see at the DLS board meeting next week, and your paper will be useful for that meeting. I believe that this mechanism identified by Fikile will enable DLS to achieve its objectives. So he was saying it would need to go to the DLS board, but only subject to assets of LMT becoming secured in order to secure assets to minimize the risk of advanced payments. Is that right?
Correct, Chair.
And then he continues, regarding the share option, this will only be exercised subject to an in-depth due diligence on LMT. Now that is what was done by KPMG, correct?
Correct.
Correct. And they indicated the concerns.
Did you confirm, Mr. Knoetze? Did you confirm?
Correct.
Yes, okay. You'll just need to speak up a bit so that we can hear and also the recording can capture what you say.
Just bear that in mind when you speak. I could see you're nodding very clearly, but your voice was very soft then. So please just bear in mind the chair's guidance. And then to continue, we would obtain board and PFMA approval in this regard being the share option. So he's referring there to the board of what? Of DLS or the main board of Denel?
That was the Denel board.
Denel board at head office, correct?
Yes, Chair.
And also PFMA approval. Is that right?
Yes, Chair.
But only in relation to the share option portion, not the advance payment issue, because that was, in terms of the delegation you referred to, subject to DLS board approval, not head office board approval and not PFMA approval. Correct?
Correct, Chair.
Right. Chair, may I just have a moment to confer with my colleague? I just want to take you now to what you say in your affidavit. Paragraph, it's page 11.
Yes, Chair.
Paragraph 6.17, you say, at some point, Mr. Mhlontlo also said that this at-risk procurement order with the prepayment of 12.7 million rand should be dealt with at the DLS board level because it is an operational matter. The option to acquire shares was meant to serve as security for this at-risk procurement order. Is that what he told you?
That's correct, Chair.
And in fact, you then referred to Annexure PK05. And if I can take you to that document, you will find it at page 49.
I'm going to page 49, Chair. You go ahead, Chair.
Is that an email from Mr. Mhlontlo on which you rely for the advice that you just referred to in your affidavit?
That's correct, Chair.
Right. Now, if you can turn to page 13, again in your affidavit.
Yes, Chair.
You refer to a special meeting of the DLS board held on the 7th of May 2010, where you say Mr.
Chair.
Talib Sadiq, the Denel Group CEO, was present. Amongst others present was Mr. Fikile Mhlontlo, Group CFO, and Mr. John Morris, the Group Strategic PFMA Compliance and Equity Specialist. And you then refer to an annexure. And if I can ask you to look down now to annexure PK07. I'll get you the page number in a moment.
It is page
So 53, 54, is that correct?
52. 52 is this 53.
Yes, 53, and in fact 54 is when the actual body of the minutes is reproduced, correct?
Yes, Chair.
And it shows the individuals present, who include yourself, that's right, management representatives, together with Mr. Burger, Mr. Naidu, and Mr. Tubis. Correct.
Yes, Chair.
And then at page 55, that deals in paragraph 4.1 with the option on strategic sourcing of a vehicle capability. That is referring to LMT. Is that right?
Correct. It's correct, Chair.
Okay. And it appears that initially what was discussed was that Denel would acquire 70%. Ultimately, what was decided upon was a 51% purchase. Is that right?
That's correct, Chair.
And there was also reference made to the 12.7 million rand as a prepayment. Correct.
Correct, Chair.
And the intention there was to give some short-term alleviation of the financial challenges that LMT was experiencing. So this was to try and assist it in its time of financial need. Correct?
Correct, Chair.
Now, you refer, it appears from your affidavit that Mr. Mhlontlo asked you about the financial status of LMT, and you explained creditors and debtors balances were 17 million rand for the creditors and 14 million rand for the debtors. And LMT would be using the DLS and debtors payments to get projects going and to pay its creditors. You also said that the LMT overdraft was going to improve. It does seem that although you felt that things could be saved at LMT, you and your colleagues were going into the decision to purchase the 51% shareholding in LMT with your eyes wide open. You were aware that LMT was financially under huge strain, correct?
Chair, at that point when we had various discussions at the different board levels and interactions with management and DCO, it was felt that for this amount of money to flow to LMT to take them out of the short-term crisis, short to medium term, we should have at least an option to purchase as security together with the different securities for the different payments that we also had to obtain. So in my opinion, that was more from a request for sure to have securities in case something goes wrong with LMT. That was one of the biggest intentions of the options, and it was requested specifically by management to have that in place, Chair.
Right. And if we can look again at the minute at page 55.
Yes, Chair.
That reflects the discussion, which includes some of the points I've already summarized about the creditors and the debtors and so forth. If I can ask you please to go to page 56.
Yes, Chair.
Second line, Mr. Knoetze reported that the overdraft facility of LMT has been reduced from 12.8 million to 10 million currently, and it is anticipated to be 9 million rand soon. The cash requirement will keep LMT's overdraft at this level and improving towards July and August 2010. The cash requirement, was that the upfront payments, the 12.7 that you were referring to earlier?
Yes, it was the cash 12.7, Chair, as well as different opportunities that they had to improve their also from their own side the overdraft facility, Chair.
Yes, and then it continues. Mr. Tubus also explained the reason why the stock that was written off was bought, as this was the assignable cause for the cash drain in LMT. Then the minutes of your meeting say as follows. The meeting discussed the mitigations on paragraph 2.3.1 of the proposal, and the proposal is in fact attached to the minute. Mr. Burger explained that this is not a risk-free decision, but management will endeavour to put controls in place to improve the business situation, specifically with respect to their financial affairs. The meeting decided that even more stricter controls should be put in place to get the company out of the current dilemma. Current dilemma is LMT's current financial dilemma, not so.
Correct, Chair.
The legal share option agreement should have tight control over the company with respect to process improvements, technical and financial control, and management control. Then there's the next paragraph I'll skip. That's dealing with certain visits that were to take place. And the following two. The foot of the page. The approval process from DPE of acquiring the 70% shares from LMT could take long, and therefore this option agreement will be valid for 3 years. The process is to run in concurrence with the equity selling process. Then we have various other discussions about the risk and drawback clause of 5 to 10%, etc. And then the second last paragraph on page 57. Are you there?
Yes,
The
Chair.
second last paragraph says, Mr. Knoetze gave his full support and commitment to the board to make this agreement work.
Yes,
Now,
Chair.
the previous paragraph, I should have started there. Mr. Palazzi went around the table to get everyone's final input to the proposal. Every member supports this proposal with the conditions relevant to this to protect Denel. Mr. Mhlontlo reported that he supported this as long as the risks as indicated are mitigated as discussed. Do you believe that those risks were in fact mitigated as they were discussed?
Yes, Chair, I believe so. Through all the different securities, assets and stock that we had to secure to make sure we were, it was not risk-free, we did exactly that, Chair.
Now, may I just ask you a few questions in conclusion? And I'll then ask the Chair for an opportunity just to caucus with my team just to see if there's anything further. And we still have the issue of the annexure to sort out over the lunch break.
Yes,
as
maybe
suggested.
when you caucus with your team, he could take this opportunity to have a look at that annexure. And maybe when you are finished, he might be finished, and then you cover that as well.
If that's possible,
Then
yes,
they may,
thank you.
I think it's short, and it should be possible.
Thank you, you, Chair.
Okay.
Mr. Knoetze, were you still in a position, a senior position at Denel when contracts were awarded to VR Laser?
Chair, I was not much involved in VR laser discussions or contracts of any sort. We did from time to time at the management meeting, of course, had discussions with regards to contracts and follow-up contracts and possible future business, but I was personally not very much involved in the VR laser process and contracting of that at all, Chair.
Now, I understand that, and in fact, you indicate as much in your affidavit too. Did you have any understanding when LNT was being acquired or the majority shareholding was being acquired by Denel? Did you have any discussions with your colleagues at ExCo or board level as to whether LMT, now that it would be subject to the majority shareholding held by Denel, would now be given preferential treatment in the award of any further business for which it was qualified? Because it would be, as it were, an in-house group entity.
Chair, not specifically, but in my opinion, it would have been proper consideration to have, if it was to be in-house and if there's an option agreement, it would have had to receive preferential treatment as a specific supplier if the option agreement was not acquired yet, Chair.
So it would have been given special treatment if it was in-house?
I would believe so, and I think the policy also stipulates that as far as I can recall, Chair.
Yes. The policy that you refer to, though, says there can be a deviation from that if there is a good reason from a business point of view for going outside the group rather than keeping it in-house, and it would have to be sent to the group executive for supply chain management, who at that stage was Mr. Mlombo. Are you aware of that as part of the rule?
Not that I was that part of the process, but I think that was the norm, if I recall correctly, Chair, yes.
Right, thank you. But you were not involved directly in the process in which Mr. Mlombo was asked for his approval, or were you?
No,
Okay, thank you.
Chair, not at all.
May I just have a brief moment to talk to my team? Thank you.
For purposes of allowing him to have a look at the annexure, shall I adjourn for 5 minutes?
If you could, thank you, Chair.
I think let me to give him that chance.
Thank you.
Mr. Knoetze, I'm going to adjourn for about 5 minutes or 7 minutes to enable you to look at the annexure that you had not received earlier on when we talked about it, and to enable Mr. Kennedy to consult with his team. So when we come back, I'm sure you will be in a position to indicate whether you confirm the contents of that annexure. So 5 or 7 minutes or thereabout, you'll just let me know once you are ready.
Thank you very much, Chair.
We adjourn.
Mr. Knoetze? Mr. Knoetze, can you hear me? If you can unmute and just respond. Can you hear me?
Chair, I can hear you very well.
Thank you very much. Have you been able to see the email that was sent to you this morning that attaches the annexure that was missing previously, PK06? It would have come from Shannon.
What I've been going through now, Mr. Chair, is the pack that was sent to me, the full pack in electronic format, do have a page in which talks about a letter or a presentation that was made to the board meeting of 15 April
Yes.
2010 in the electronic pack. In the electronic pack, there's that letter which stipulates what the recommendation was in 15 April to the board. That has been included in the pack electronically, which I saw. But specifically the board minutes of the 15th, I am going through my mails again. Was it sent this morning, Chair?
That in what? In the
Are you
electronic
still there?
version or the... Is that the updated? Mr. Knoetze, we may have an answer for you that helps. If you look at the electronic copy that you've been given, that is the updated one, can I ask you to go to page 52? In fact, 51.
Chair, I'm going to 50.
It's not so good this way because
Just a moment, Chair. I'm on my close to 52.
Just go to 51 first.
51. I am on 51, Chair.
Okay, is that just the heading annexure PK06?
Yes, Chair.
Now, what follows, according to my bundle, and I'm hoping yours is the same in electronic form, is the next page is 52.1.
Yes, Chair.
Have you got that?
Got it, Chair?
And that is headed Company Confidential Board Meeting number 15. Correct?
Yes, Chair.
And there's a big picture of a tank. Correct?
Yes, it's correct, Chair.
And then page 52.2 is just a one-line DLS and LMT cooperation. Correct?
Yes, Chair.
And then 52.3, that's a status report. Recommendation that the board approve the recommendation as per the report. Is that right?
Correct, Chair.
And then you've got the report attached as 52.4 and 5.
That's correct, Chair.
As we understand it, these are the missing documents that were missing from your original annexures. But do you confirm that's what you in fact had in mind?
No, Chair. I had in mind the formal documents of the minutes of the board meeting held on 15 April 2010, of which this was one presentation only made to the DLS board, but the official minutes of the board meeting held on 15 April 2010 is the ones that I've requested many months ago, and since up until today, I have not received the board minutes, but only this portion that was included as a presentation, single 2 pages presentation to the DLS board.
I've got you. Thank you. Can you just give me a second? Do we ever get them? Mr. Knoetze, can you hear me?
I can, Chair.
I'm told that inquiries were made with Denel to try and get hold of those minutes, but they haven't been found. So this is all that they have come up with. I accept fully your point that they're not actually the minutes. So can we just put on record that you've requested the minutes? I will put on record that we've been unable to get them, and that all we've been able to get are the presentation documents that we've just looked at. If the
Yes,
minutes
Chair.
eventually become available to us, then we may have to come back to you to confirm that. Are you happy with that, sir?
It's a while that we've been struggling to get it, so I think this is only one portion of it, but
Yeah.
you will also see, Chair, on my supplementary, I've also not included the annexure of the minutes, because as it was not, full complete minutes wasn't available.
Yes.
So our supplementary doesn't refer to the minutes then,
I understand. Thank you very much for all that clarity. All right, thank you.
100%.
Okay. Are you ready, Mr. Knoetze?
I am, Chair.
Thank you. The judge is about to come back in.
All rise.
Yes, Mr. Kennedy.
Thank you, Chair, for that opportunity. We managed to speak to Mr. Knoetze, and he's given clarity which I'd like to place on record, if we may,
Yes.
in relation to this annexure, and then we just have one or two final questions. Mr. Knoetze, thank you for assisting us earlier in the clarification. Your affidavit, your main affidavit, wanted to refer to minutes as being attached as an annexure, and that is the minutes of the board meeting of the 15th of April 2010. Is that correct?
Correct, Chair.
And you were hoping to get those minutes from Denel, and if they'd been obtained, they would have been attached as annexures through your supplementary affidavit, correct?
Correct, Chair.
Now, you've indicated to me that you've asked for those minutes and not been provided with them. If I can just place on record the advice that the legal team gave you recently, which is that we have still not been given the minutes of that meeting from Denel. They have indicated that they have problems in relation to some of their records. So we still do not have those minutes to be able to give you, Mr. Knoetze, or with respect to the chair, either to the commission. Now, I'm told, Mr. Knoetze, and I want you to confirm this or correct it if it's wrong. I'm told that my colleagues in the legal team made available to the only documents that they were given in relation to this aspect and the board meeting on this date. Can I take you in the bundle, the latest version of the electronic bundle that you have in front of you, to page 52.1?
Yes, Chair.
Now, can you identify the document that starts at page 52.1?
It was the heading of a board meeting number 15 April 2010. And if I read it correctly, Chair, I think this is the one that exactly the one that I referred to as a possible annexure to have been added, which I could get not hold of the minutes.
Yes. Now, what is clear from page 52.1 to 52.5 is that the minutes themselves are not included, correct?
Correct, Chair.
But what is the document? Was this the presentation, part of a slide presentation at the board meeting?
Yes, Chair, it was one of the presentations that was made to the board, Chair.
And this dealt specifically with the issue concerned, being the cooperation between DLS and LMT. Is that right?
It was one of the presentations, yes, Chair.
Yes. And then at page 52.3, we see a status report on that topic with the signature and title of Mr. Burger as Chief Executive Officer, correct?
I do not see a signature. Oh, sorry, Mr. Chair. I do see the signature on the page 52.3 of Mr. Burger, yes.
Right, thank you. And paragraph 1 says the purpose of this submission is to seek approval regarding the recommendations tabled on the possible cooperation agreement between DLS and LMT. And then paragraph 2 refers to the report as being attached, and 3 seeks the board approval. And the report, was that Mr. Burger's report from page 52.4 to 52.5?
It was a management report. It was a combination of inputs from management and as the tradition was in DLS and Denel, the CEO, if there were anything that were presented to the board, in this case DLS board, Mr. Burger would have signed, and it was under his signature, yes, Chair.
Yes. So did you give your input, for example, at page 52.4 under the heading financial analysis?
That's correct, Chair.
And then near the end of that paragraph under the heading financial analysis, 3 lines from the bottom, it says a cash flow analysis, however, indicates that this is a short-term problem. To solve this problem, LMT has to acquire additional cash in April. It appears that a cash injection of 10 million rand will solve their short-term problem. Is that the basis on which the recommendation was made to go ahead with approval of the 12.7 million advance payment?
That's correct, Chair. Just to add to that, it was seen as a very more short to maybe medium term, but short term solution. There were also talks of additional capital investment and IDC funding to be acquired, which they were busy regularly to acquire IDC support, and also then possible other equity partners or option agreements with other shareholding as well in future, Chair.
Right. I might just have a moment, Chair. Yes. Now, in relation to the acquisition of the majority shares in LMT, when you were discussing with your colleagues at the level of EXCO or the DLS board, did you have a discussion as to what role DLS would be expected to play in the future management of LMT? In other words, you were now going to, your company, your group was going to buy the majority shareholding in LMT. Who was going to control the management?
Chair, the opinion of management as an integrated approach was that the capabilities of DLS and specifically the strategic capabilities of LMT should be incorporated into under one roof and integrated within one organization, which meant that over time our idea was to make sure that where there were synergies between the two companies, that it gets properly integrated and in all probability then integrated under the management in future. of DLS. That was the objective or the thinking at that point in time, Chair.
And was that discussed, to your knowledge, with LMT's then owners as to how it would be managed after the acquisition?
I think some of this, Chair, sorry, through you, I think some of these discussions did take place, between Mr. Burger specifically and Mr. Dr. Stefan Nel, who was the CEO of LMT. And in my opinion, if I can recall or I can relate, I think there were some discussions with regards to that. Yes, Chair.
Were you aware of any change in thinking at any stage? That initially it was intended that DLS would run the management of LMT, but later it transpired that in fact DLS wouldn't take an active role in that.
Chair, I was not at that time close to the point where the PFMA approval was sought and also PFMA approval was given. I was still under the impression and from the view that would have been the way going forward until and up to the process where the integration took place at DCO, and then it was a different reporting specifically then from the LNT as a supplier directly into DCO. And obviously that was maybe the thinking of the leaders at that point in time. But yeah, that was as far as I can remember, Chair.
Now, I'd like to move to page 49.
Yes, Chair.
49 appears to be an email from Mr. Mhlontlo to yourself with various others copied in. Correct? That was dated the 22nd of April 2010. And Mr. Mhlontlo says this, I'm just going to read a few lines, if I may, Chair, from the relevant portions. He says, "Dear all, yesterday I was taken through the DLS management proposal. Some key points based on DLS management are: DLS intends placing an order of 52 million rand and pay 12 million rand upfront to LMT for turret hulls needed in Hoefyster production phase. The upfront payment could be scaled down, but not less than 4 million initially," etc. And then he refers to various other concerns about the Hoefyster production phase not being confirmed, and then the issue of security, etc. And then he says, after all the bullet points, he says, response: the proposal can't be implemented as proposed by DLS management, particularly considering the DLS dealing with public funds and other considerations becomes relevant. Relevant aspects are production at risk in a division decision up to a set limit, reference down to delegation of authority document. The division or division board will have to consider all pertinent aspects, including but not limited to the fact Hoefyster has not been secured to date. Prepayments are divisional considerations and are not specifically dealt with in the delegation of authority. Payment risk identified needs to be mitigated adequately, as the current proposed security is weak and can't be acceptable. DLS would need to have a valid guarantee or securities or attach LMT assets, IP and other key systems rand for rand, etc. And he continues to set out various other concerns that he has. So the bottom line of Mr. Mhlontlo's email seems to be that he cannot accept the proposal that was being put forward because it would have meant too much risk to DLS and to the Denel group, partly bearing in mind that DLS is dealing with public funds as a state-owned entity. Now, you received this email, did you?
Yes, Chair.
And how did you deal with it?
Chair, if I can take you to the annexures just before we go to the other annexures that I've added. After this specific mail from Mr. Fikile Mhlontlo to everyone involved in, you can see basically the biggest portion of the Denel management. After the previous board meeting, also after 15th of April, 15 April 2010, where it was decided to go ahead, and it was a DLS board meeting, I arranged a meeting with Mr. Fikile Mhlontlo, and we discussed all these different conditions before we could go ahead. And as you quite rightly said, Mr. Fikile Mhlontlo was very correct in having certain specific securities and conditions to be in place, which I had a discussion with him, with all the related other parties, referred to previous mails that I've attached, between Investec, myself, and Mr. Morris and Mr. Mhlontlo, whereby we agreed the different conditions that had to be adhered to by Mr. Mhlontlo, and that was all put in place, all the conditions relating to the paragraphs that you had just mentioned, the paragraphs relating to mitigated adequately in terms of all the other to be current proposed securities, which is LNT assets and IP and other key systems. And after that discussion with Mr. Mhlontlo, we were then given the go-ahead if all those conditions were in place, and the mail of that is in the annexure that I can refer you to, where it was said, if all those are like the minutes of 7 May 2010, the same words from Mr. Mhlontlo, that he was happy if those conditions are met, we can go ahead, and it stays, in his words, it stayed a DLS board risk decision, and they have to apply their minds, but he's happy if all securities have been adhered to, Chair.
Right, may I just have a moment? If we look at, again, at page 50, I took you to the early part, page 50.
50, yes, Chair.
I took you through some of the earlier points, but you see the last 3 solid bullet points. You see starting taking the group financial position into account. Do you see that?
Yes, Chair.
Right, let me read those 3 bullet points into the record, if I may. Taking the group financial position into account, a lower amount than the gross amount proposed of 12 million rand will have to be considered. Additional measures to protect company assets will need to be considered, like DLS management, accessing monthly accounts, etc. If limits are exceeded as delegated and/or options and/or option is considered to be exercised, the matter will need to be referred to the Denel board. DLS board and its management take full responsibility for any issues that may arise, positive or negative, regarding this proposal. Would you agree that those are quite serious concerns that he raised?
It was, Chair, and for that specific reason, I had several discussions and interactions with respective board members, and specifically with Mr. Burger, and I had with Investec detailed discussions, which is referred to in the above annexures, where Mr. Mhlontlo eventually agreed to all the securities, and on the minutes of 7 May 2010, I refer to you again to minutes attached 7 May of 2010, which he agreed to, that after all those securities have been put in place, he will be happy from his side with proceedings, Chair.
Right, thank you. Mr. Chair, may we just deal with 2 final aspects? I want to correct something that I misunderstood earlier in relation to why Mr. Knoetze was not able to attend in person. I thought he was the gentleman stuck in George. In fact, I'm mixing him up with somebody else. I'm sorry about that misunderstanding.
That one is a lawyer, isn't it?
I'm sorry?
The one in George is a lawyer. I
That's
think.
correct. That's
Yeah.
quite correct. Mr. Knoetze, just for the record, you put in an application to be heard on on a virtual platform on the computer line today. I just want to correct, and I'm sorry that I made a mistake earlier. I was confused. You're actually speaking to us from Pretoria East, not so?
I'm in Centurion, Pretoria.
Centurion, right? And I understand that there was a medical reason which you provided proof of to the legal team, which has been forwarded to the chairperson to indicate that there is a risk if you had to travel to Johannesburg today. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's all medical related for
Yes.
COVID-19 chronic risk.
Right.
Chair, yes.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. And then the final issue of clarification, I just want to confirm, I think you indicated this earlier, you have an MBA in marketing. As I understand it, the BCom is also, you also majored in marketing, is that right?
It was a BCom marketing with related financial accounting subjects, but the MBA is a general a master's in business administration, correct?
Thank you very much, Mr. Knoetze. Chair, we have no further questions of this witness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Knoetze, for availing yourself to give evidence before the commission. We appreciate it. Should we need you to come back, we will ask you, but for now you are excused. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Much appreciated.
Thank you. It's 1 o'clock, so we'll take the lunch adjournment
As you please, Chair.
and resume at 2.
As you please, Chair.
I just want to talk about starting times for the rest of the week. How does it look like? Does it look like we might need to start at 9, 9:30, or earlier than normal? And when would when would you like that to be? Just want to see what mornings are available that I can give to time for meetings with different sections of the commission who always want to see me about different things.
Yes.
But the priority is to make sure that we finish the Denel evidence this week.
Indeed, Chair.
So, but we would also, from my side, I'm available to sit later than 4 o'clock on each day, if necessary. There might be a slight problem for Wednesday this week because I may have promised Mr. Seleka that we could, in the evening session, we could have an evening session and do one short witness relating to ESCOM. But I'm told by him that we might need only about 30 minutes, certainly not more than an hour.
Right.
So if that were to happen, that would simply deprive you of 30 minutes or 1 hour, but otherwise we would use all the other time for an evening session if we need to use it.
Yes.
But for the other days, there's no problem. Of course, Friday is an exception,
Indeed.
but tomorrow, Wednesday, Thursday, we can start, we can sit till late. We
Thank you,
can
Chair.
start early if need be. I know there is a section of the commission that have said they can see me tomorrow at 8:30. I might have to change that if we decide to start at 9. Or what is your situation?
Chair, I'd like to just confirm this with my colleagues, but my understanding is that tomorrow is not too problematic because we've had to shift witnesses around and so forth, and it looks like tomorrow won't take
We
longer
won't
than
need
the
to
normal.
start early.
So no, I think that if we start at 10 tomorrow, that should be fine.
Okay.
But I'd like to check with my colleagues. Wednesday, I think in light of the possible need to accommodate my learned friend, Mr. Seleka, that might be an idea to start at 9 because we have quite a number of witnesses to deal with
okay.
then. And I think
Okay.
Friday, in order to not to overrun, you can
Yes.
start early on Friday. That would
Yes.
assist. But
Yeah.
may I just have a quick moment?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for that, Chair. My colleagues confirmed that tomorrow shouldn't be an issue, so we're happy to start at 10 rather than 9, and you'll then be able to see the other people at 8:30.
Yes.
What they've suggested is we can ask your indulgence to start early at 9 o'clock on Wednesday and Thursday and Friday,
Okay, no,
if
that's
that's
fine.
possible.
No, that's fine. And in terms of evenings, what's your
we're-
assessment? How much time, or would it depend on each day? How much time do you think we might use after 4? An hour, 2 hours?
I would think an hour. We should be able to finish by 5 o'clock latest on those days if
on
we
those
start
days. Okay.
at 9. But it
Okay.
always depends.
Yeah,
A witness
that's
may
fine.
take longer than we
Yeah,
expect, as
yeah.
has already happened today.
No, that's helpful enough. So then tomorrow we'll start at 10 and go up to 5. But if we need to go beyond 5, we'll go beyond 5.
Thank you, Chair.
Thursday we'll start at 9, go up to 5. If necessary, go beyond 5. And Friday we can start at 9 as well.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. Okay, all right. Let's adjourn for lunch and then we will resume at 2:05. We adjourn.